I'm in love with the Indonesian language, so I'm going to talk about it. You may not have guessed it, but Indonesian is spoken all over Indonesia, serving as a lingua franca for the very linguistically diverse country, which has the second most languages in the world. Indonesian is primarily spoken as a second language, but plenty of people know it as a first language, especially in urban areas like Jakarta. Indonesian is based on the Malay language, primarily spoken in another country you're not going to guess, Malaysia, as well as Singapore and Brunei. They are very similar languages, differing primarily with vocabulary and the way certain sounds are pronounced. If you want to consider them the same language, that's okay, and if you want to treat them separately, that's also okay. In Indonesian, the language is referred to as
Bahasa Indonesia,
literally language Indonesia. There are two main forms of spoken Indonesian,
Bahasa Baku,
which is the standard language used in formal contexts and that the government and others prescribe to be used in all contexts, and the colloquial language, called
Bahasa Gaul,
or various other names, which is used more in daily life and on the internet, and is often influenced by the regional languages spoken in various parts of the country. The way in which Indonesians speak using Indonesian varies not just based on the region, but also from person to person. What may sound incorrect to one speaker will sound perfectly grammatical to another. One speaker may prefer one word for a concept, another may prefer a synonym. With that long preamble out of the way, let's talk about the sounds of Bahasa Indonesia. There are 6 vowels, a, e, I, o, u, and a, as well as 24 consonants, with 19 native ones, those being ma, na, nya, nga, pa, ba, ta, da, cha, ja, ka, ga, a, sa, ha, wa, la, ya, and ra, and 5 extras and loanwords, fa, va, za, sha, and kha, which are often replaced by other sounds for many speakers. Many consonants can appear at the end of a syllable, those being ma, na, nga, pa, ta, ka, sa, la, ra, and most uniquely the glottal consonants a and ha. In native roots, most of these consonants only appear at the ends of words, except for the nasals and ra. Whenever I and U are in the final syllable followed by a coda consonant, they're often pronounced as near close I and as in
kecil,
and
agung.
in Malay, they're pronounced as A and O in these contexts. Speaking of which, the mid-consonants besides schwa are realized either as close mid A and O, or open mid A and A depending on the speaker and the individual word. In writing, voiced obstruents like ba and da appear at the ends of words, and some speakers pronounce them as written, but most pronounce them as unvoiced pa and ta. When any non-glottal stop appears at the ends of syllables, they're pronounced unreleased as they are in languages like Korean, Vietnamese, Thai, and Cantonese. Written consonant clusters also appear at the ends of words, which are typically simplified when spoken out loud. Indonesian has the native diphthongs I, ow, and oi, and in 2015, the Indonesian government introduced a 4th diphthong a for loanwords. Indonesian words are most often stressed on the second to last syllable, except for when the second syllable has a schwa, in which case it goes on the final syllable of the word.
Satu, cacing, binatang, sering, karena.
There are some rare exceptions to these stress patterns like
Paus.
there are quite a few sound changes present in colloquial speech, namely dropping the schwa a in the first syllable before liquids, dropping ha in all contexts except between 2 similar vowels, a shift of I and ao to a and o, and the reduction of a in the final syllable before consonants to a. Most speakers of Malay and Malaysia also reduce word final a to a and drop ra at the ends of words. On the flip side, and primarily with Malay, there are a handful of other loanword exclusive consonants, but they're spelled the same as other sounds, and are only used by educated speakers who also know the languages those words come from and how they're pronounced in them, those being tha, the, ka, and ra. Now it's time to talk about how Indonesian words are spelled. Indonesian is written with the Latin alphabet. On screen are a bunch of sounds spelled the same way as they are in the IPA and most languages. The affricates cha and ja are written with single letters, C and J, and the semivowel ya is written with Y. There are digraphs NG for the velar nasal, and NY for the palatal nasal nya. Sha is written as SY, and whenever the velar fricative kha occurs once in a blue moon, it's written with KH. The vowels a and e are both written with the letter E officially and by most of its speakers. For distinguishing between the two vowels, E circumflex is used for the schwa, E acute is used for the close mid e, and E grave is used when the sound is intended to be pronounced as open mid e. These accent marks are only used in dictionaries, transcriptions, and materials for learners. The glottal stop is usually unwritten, except for when it occurs at the ends of syllables, where it is written as K, with no way to tell if the letter should instead be pronounced as ka in that context. The main 3 diphthongs are written as AI, AU, and OI respectively. the same as when two different vowels are next to each other. These digraphs typically represent two monophthongs whenever they are the only two vowel letters in the word, when the vowels are followed by a coda consonant, or when the two vowels are part of different roots. Compare
gulay,
where they're pronounced as a diphthong because they're part of the same root, and
gulai,
where AI is said as two different vowels because they're part of different roots, though both words are spelled the same. Historically, Indonesian used to be written based on Dutch spelling conventions, with the palatal sounds ya, cha, ja, sha, and nya written as j, tj, dj, sj, and nj, the velar fricative as ch, and most cumbersome, the vowel u as oe, even though the letter u went unused in this historical orthography. On the bright side, the vowels and e used to be distinguished. Two separate adjacent vowels had diaresis on the second one, and the glottal stop was explicitly written out with an apostrophe. A spelling reform in 1947, shortly after Indonesia gained independence, changed some of these spellings. Malay, on the other hand, used to be written with spelling based on English, with a few other innovations unique to it, before coming together with Indonesian orthography in 1972 as the governments of the two countries agreed to make spelling the same between the two languages. There is still a tiny difference, as Malay writes the voiced velar fricative ra as gh, but since Indonesian doesn't have this sound, words with it are simply written as g. Compare the words for dialect, which is pronounced
logat,
by most of the speakers of both languages. Malay is also often written with Jawi, which is an adaptation of the Arabic script for the language. It used to be the main way of writing the language before British colonization, and is still used in Islamic religious contexts for Malay. This little tidbit fits nowhere else, but rarely and informally, the number 2 is used to mark reduplication. For those who don't know what reduplication is, I'll discuss it in the grammar section, which is right now. Indonesian puts nouns before modifiers, prepositions before nouns, has subject, verb, object, word order, and puts direct objects before indirect objects.
Ibu menawari tamu makanan enak.
Instead of a plural prefix or suffix, Indonesian simply has the noun said twice to convey more than one of it, called reduplication. Whenever it occurs, a dash is written in between, and reduplication occurs in plenty of other contexts too. When nouns come after number words, a noun classifier is put in between, the most common of which is orang for people, but other counters like buah for things and ekor meaning tail for animals are common too. Whenever satu, which means one, is used with a counter, it becomes sa. Pronoun selection and usage varies a lot based on formality and the personal choice of speakers. For the first person, the formal pronoun is saya, but the relatively informal aku is used more often. In the first person plural, formal Indonesian makes the distinction between kita, which includes the speaker, and kami, which excludes the speaker. However, colloquially, kita can be used for both exclusive and inclusive we, and even replaces the first person singular in some contexts. In the second person, anda, which is always capitalized, is formal in both the singular and plural, but less formally, kamu is used in the singular, and kalian is used in the plural. For the third person, dia is the singular, and mereka is used in the plural. They have no gender distinction, but many Indonesians only use these pronouns to refer to humans, dropping these pronouns when they refer to something else. Colloquial Indonesian has like a bajillion other pronouns, which often vary from region to region. Most notable among these are gua or gue for I, and lu or lo for you, which are used in Jakarta. Aku, kamu, and dia can turn into suffixes ku, mu, and nya, which mark possession when used after nouns, or mark the pronouns as objects when used after verbs or prepositions. So kucingku means my cat, and cintamu means love you. There are a few fixed phrases where ku is used as a prefix to indicate that I is the subject, as in kucinta from the Indonesian national anthem, meaning I love. Nya has a few additional uses, namely marking certain adverbs and phrases. As for demonstratives, ini means this, and itu means that. Itu can also serve as a marker for definiteness if the noun was mentioned previously in the sentence, phrase, or conversation, but otherwise the suffix nya is used for definiteness. Indonesian has a variety of markers for tense and aspect, such as sudah and telah, which both mean an action is complete, sedang, which is used for ongoing actions, akan used for future actions, baru for recent past actions that just happened, pernah for the past habitual, and belum meaning not yet, which is the negative version of sudah. There are a handful of mood markers as well, the most common of which are bisa and dapat, which both mean can, boleh, which means may, and harus, which means must. When comparing adjectives, lebih is used to mean more, and kurang means less. With superlatives, paling meaning most can be used, or the prefix ter is used. And now we get to what I've been dancing around this entire time. Indonesian's wide array of prefixes and suffixes it attaches to roots to use them as verbs, and in deriving nouns, adjectives, and other verbs. Many of these suffixes can occur with each other, usually with a special combined meaning, and the exact meaning indicated by an affix varies from word to word and has to be memorized for each root. The base form of a root can often be used as a noun, adjective, or verb interchangeably. Among the most common prefixes are mang, which marks active verbs, and bar, which marks stative verbs. The majority of formal Indonesian verbs require one of these two suffixes when used regularly, but there are various verbs which don't require either, and in colloquial Indonesian, most verbs can have the prefixes dropped. Mang changes form depending on the initial consonant of the root they attach to. It remains the same before vowels, ga, ha, and ha, changes to mum before ba, fa, va, changes to mun before da, za, cha, ja, and sha, becoming palatal for the last three of those, and the nasals dropped altogether before nasals, liquids, and semivowels, so before ma, na, nya, nga, ra, la, wa, and ya. The initial consonants of roots starting with pa, ta, or ka gets dropped, getting replaced entirely by either mum, mun, mung, or mun. The prefix bar also changes form based on the start of the root, losing the r if it comes before another r, and usually if the first syllable has the sequence ar. Additionally, the nasal consonants in the prefix pung changes the same way as for mung, and the r in prefixes tar and par follows the same rules as bar. There are a few exceptions, like how with the root ajar, the ra in bar and par becomes la, and mung and pung usually keep the pa in the sequence par, and in a few other words. Examples include
memperalati,
and
mempunyakan.
Many times, with roots that are only one syllable, mung becomes manga and pung becomes panga. Additionally, in colloquial Indonesian, the ma in mung or manga gets dropped altogether, which oftentimes results in nasal clusters at the beginnings of words. There's the suffix an, which when used by itself forms nouns which are an object relating to the verb, and can be combined with the prefix ka to make abstract nouns, pung to refer to the act of doing a verb, and par for an abstraction or sometimes place relating to bar verbs. The prefix pung is an agentive prefix, referring to a person or tool carrying out an action, equivalent to the suffix in English. My personal favorite is the prefix tar, which is used for the accidental, used not just for actions done by mistake, but also sudden, unexpected, unintended, undesirable, or uncontrollable actions. It can also be used for stative verbs and refer to ability or the lack thereof. Tar is often replaced by ka in colloquial speech. In formal Indonesian, ka by itself is only used with numbers, turning them ordinal, or having a wide variety of other interesting uses. The suffixes kan and i often mark causative forms of verbs, or act as substitutes for prepositions before objects, with benefactive, instrumental, directional, or locative meanings. Colloquial Indonesian has the suffix in, which pretty much has the same meanings of both kan and i, and often replaces them. The prefix di is used to form passives, which are used quite often in Indonesian, typically accompanied by oleh, which means by. The prefix par can be used in conjunction with mum or di, meaning to have or cause a characteristic of an adjective, or when used with numbers by itself just makes fractions. There are a few less common combinations of a prefix and suffix that I'm just going to leave on screen in case you somehow didn't get tired of my explanations. Two suffixes primarily used in writing are la, which marks emphasis, and ka, which either turns a sentence into a question or emphasizes question words. Colloquial Indonesian has various other ways of forming yes or no questions instead. With open-ended questions, Indonesian simply has the question word replace where the answer to the question would go instead of changing the word order, like in the Chinese languages. Indonesian also has three ways of negating sentences, meaning no and don't.
Tidak,
Is used for verbs and adjectives, and
bukan,
is used before nouns. When answering no to yes or no questions, tidak or bukan is used depending on if the full answer would use tidak or bukan. There's also
jangan,
which is used for negative commands. Positive commands usually drop the mung in the root word. According to various frequency lists, the most common word in Indonesian is yang, which is used in relative clauses to mean which, who, or that, but can also be used with adjectives or nouns followed by adjectives for emphasis, and can be put before an adjective without any noun as a
yang besar,
to mean something along the lines of the big one or what is big. Finally, let's talk about the vocabulary of Indonesian. Most of Indonesian's vocabulary is inherited directly from Malay, and the majority of words used in everyday conversation are of native Austronesian origin, though there are boatloads of loanwords from a wide variety of languages, thanks in large part to the location of Indonesia and Malaysia along major trade routes between South and East Asia, particularly along the Strait of Malacca. Chinese traders interacting with speakers of Malay for centuries brought in loanwords from their languages, particularly Hokkien. Hindu and Buddhist influence brought many words of Sanskrit origin, many of which were borrowed indirectly through Javanese. To a lesser extent, Tamil words also came from both Hindu influence and trade. Later, with the spread of Islam in the area, very many borrowings from Arabic and Persian words occurred. Then with the arrival of Portuguese traders, words were brought over from their language, and Dutch traders followed by Dutch colonialists led to words from Dutch getting borrowed into Indonesian, while Malay got more influence from English. After independence, Indonesian has continued to incorporate borrowings from English and even Greek and Latin. And throughout this entire timeline, Malay got plenty of loanwords from other Austronesian languages in the surrounding area, and after the Indonesian language split off, it started to incorporate more borrowings from languages spoken in Indonesia but not Malaysia, such as Javanese, Sundanese, and Balinese. As for the native Malayic roots, the majority of them are 2 syllables, with a lot of them being 3, and very few being only 1 syllable long, those primarily being a handful of function words and shortenings of other words. Speaking of which, pretty much all of the most frequently used words have shortened or casual forms used in colloquial speech. Another thing with native root words is that most of them end with the consonants or the vowels a, I, or u, with words ending in the other 3 vowels mostly being loans. And of course, because of all the borrowings from different languages, Indonesian often has a boatload of synonyms for the same word. Word choice, of course, often varies from region to region and speaker to speaker. Regarding common phrases that all those language learning apps feel obligated to teach you immediately, in the sentence, "What's your name?" the word siapa, meaning who, is used instead of apa, which means what. The usual way of saying goodbye or see you later is
Sampai jumpa.
Many textbooks directly translate goodbye as
Selamat tinggal.
which is used far less often because it has the connotation that the person is going to pass away. On a lighter note, I'm going to list a bunch of loanwords in Indonesian before ending the video off.
Toko, kongsi, teh, giok, muka, utara, arti, singa, kertas, kabar, soal, sehat, enak, bebek, tuntas, gampang, pos, nol, lampu, edisi, botol, lobby, gitar, riset, kolam, zirah, meja, universitas.
And that's pretty much all I have to say about Indonesian. My primary sources for this video were Understanding Indonesian Grammar by James Neil Sneddon, and the Colloquial Indonesian section by Micheal C. Ewing, Chapter 8 of the Austronesian Languages of Asia and Madagascar. Thank you to the speakers who helped with this video, Mev, Salamantia, Sir Quicken, and Simplitz. Thank you to my Patreon supporters SC Van Nostrand, Sunder, Erica Sim, Adam Zrinek, Luke Jensen, Jolly Pikachu, Kekidion, Andrew Brown, Carol Soul, and Peter F. And until next time, sampai jumpa!